got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity, this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So after that tour de force from Bibi on Monday evening, a presentation about the...
Iran lied.
Well,
yeah,
I
mean,
but,
that was, he sure did his homework.
But, well, the special operation to get what they obtained and then to unveil it to the world after they clearly already apprised America about it was rather remarkable. And it's been interesting, too, the last 48 hours, you see all of the old Obama apparatchiks making the rounds on the cable news to, like I saw that Ernest Moniz, remember him, the energy secretary who looks like a 17th century composer? So he's out there flacking, and they're mischaracterizing that we knew this is nothing new, and the nuclear deal was to prevent Iran from nuclearization, when in point of fact, as the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, said with Brett Baer the other night, in fact, it paved the way.
If we pretend that everything is fine, Iran will just walk into becoming a nuclear weapon state. And this is the foremost sponsor of terrorism in the world. And this deal did not block them from getting a bomb. It actually paves their way to an entire nuclear arsenal.
And in terms of the information that was recovered and presented for public consumption, at least conceptually, that this is old news, everybody knew this. Ron Dermer said this.
There's hard evidence there that Iran has a military nuclear program and that it falsified all their reports to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. What Netanyahu did today, he did not present simply a smoking gun. He presented a smoking bomb. And I think all the world should take notice of it, and we are now sharing that information. We shared it with U.S. intelligence a number of weeks ago. We are now sharing that information with the rest of intelligence agencies around the world in terms of our allies.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Michael Rubin, a former Pentagon official, now a resident scholar for the American Enterprise Institute. Michael, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
Give us your sense of how significant was what Israeli intelligence uncovered and the decision-making to reveal it to the world the way that Netanyahu chose to.
Well, it's extremely significant because it belies much of what the Iranians have been saying during their negotiations on up to the present day. For example, Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, with whom Secretary of State John Kerry had negotiated, had said Iran never had a military nuclear program, so that's a flat-out lie. The supreme leader of Iran had supposedly issued a fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons, and that's what President Obama had used to justify going into negotiations. Well, here that shows that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is a liar. And then when it comes to people saying, hey, there's really nothing new here, well, actually, it seems that there is a great deal new with regard to Iran's metal work with uranium metal and some of the aspects of processing, warhead design, and so forth that they had never declared to the IAEA. But there's one more thing which I don't think has gotten enough discussion, which I really think should be a wake-up call. You remember, Dan, how in 2007 there was a national intelligence estimate that said that Iran had stopped working on their nuclear weapon in 2003? Mm-hmm. But when the IAEA was saying, hey, this was all known to us, what the IAEA said is, we've seen no evidence that Iran has been working on a nuclear bomb since 2009, which means back in 2007, the U.S. intelligence community had gotten it flat out wrong as well.
Yeah, interesting. That is a good point I didn't pick up on.
So what do you think? What are you sensing from President Trump? What is he going to do here with the Iran deal?
Well, Amy, I think the clock is ticking with regard to whether or not he's going to recertify U.S. participation in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Now, what a lot of people get wrong is they think that somehow when President Trump makes his decision on May 12th, that is simply with regard to whether Iran has been whether the JCPOA is working or not. But actually, what the decision that President Trump is going to be making is based on, if you remember, something called the Corker-Cardin Compromise. That whole Iran deal wasn't passed as a treaty. It wasn't ratified by the Senate. Rather, only about a third of senators agreed to not, decided that they wouldn't disapprove. And therefore, you've got a situation in which the president, as a result of that compromise, has to say, do we have faith that this is in U.S. interest? Do we have faith that Iran is abiding by this deal? And it's going to be very hard Trump's going to be very hard place to reach any compromise. I think actually the pressure's on the Europeans now to try to fix some of the gaps in this deal.
Now, there are skeptics out there, as you know, good and well, Michael, about Israel, not people that are not fans of our relationship with Israel, including most of the D.C. press corps, remarkably. And so there are suggestions, somewhat hushed tones, that this has a lot to do with Bibi trying to kind of wag the dog away from his domestic legal and political problems. This is Israel trying to draw us into a war with Iran and manipulate President Trump. How do you respond to some of those conspiracy theories?
Well, I mean, I think that's just what they are, conspiracy theories. Number one, when it comes to this idea of wagging the dog, look, there's always a security crisis in Israel, and the fact of the matter is, in the past, the independent Israeli judiciary has acted against political leaders, Ehud Olmert, Moshe Katsav, who was Israel's president, regardless of what the security situation is. Just like in the United States, by nature of being a democracy with separation of powers, none of this would influence the judiciary. Second of all, when it comes to going into a war with Iran, I don't think that's what Israel wants. I don't think that's what anyone wants. But what the Israelis are saying, and I think what Donald Trump also believes, is if you're going to try to have a nuclear arms accord or any sort of agreement, it's got to be followed. And if you allow one side to cheat and they don't follow that, that's not the path to peace. That's the path to a disaster.
Ambassador Dermer, when he was on with Brett Barry, played a couple of clips. He also suggested that some of the money that Iran got up front on the unfreezing of assets, the midnight drop, that was just a signing bonus. The real money is them being able to restart oil exports, and that's a $35 billion a year infusion of capital. And so, this is the problem. This is another one of the problems with the Iran nuclear deal.
Well, Dan, this is one of the things that frustrated me when it was being negotiated. The negotiators in Obama's echo chamber had basically said, hey, look how Iran increased the centrifuges during the Bush administration. That shows that coercion doesn't work. We've got to negotiate. But what Obama didn't say, or perhaps didn't realize, is between 1998 and 2005, the European Union had decided to triple its trade with Iran. The price of oil increased fivefold, and Iran took 70% of those hard currency earnings and invested them in their ballistic missile and, at the time, still covert nuclear weapons program. And so it should come as no surprise that when sanctions collapse on Iran, when Iran joins the international market, they're not going to better the lives, use the money to better the lives for their own people. They're going to invest in their special projects. They don't have to be responsive to their people because it's not a democracy. It's a dictatorship. The supreme leader actually believes that he's the deputy of the Messiah on earth. He doesn't care what the ordinary people say, and one of the reasons he's not afraid of the ordinary people is he's got the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to sort of serve as to insulate him from whatever the Iranian street may think.
Well, speaking of dictators, President Trump should be announcing soon where and when he will meet with Kim Jong-un. Is it too early to say that President Trump should be winning a Nobel Peace Prize for these efforts and for this North Korean initiative?
Well, you certainly struck a nerve with me, Amy, because I've got a long-term grievance about the Nobel Peace Prizes. Through all the Nobel Prizes, they're given for a life's work. Usually when the person is in their 70s or 80s, but with the Nobel Peace Prize, it's always been aspirational. I'd say give no one the Nobel Peace Prize unless 40 years have passed and we can see whether what they did actually brought peace. Otherwise, we're going to have disasters like, for example, Yasser Arafat getting the Peace Prize,
that's a good
President
example.
Obama getting the Peace Prize.
Yeah, Al Gore getting the Peace Prize.
And I'm also dubious about the whole negotiation with North Korea, to be quite honest.
Elaborate on your concern there.
Well, first of all, when North Korea promises to denuclearize, I mean, back in 1992, that was actually the agreement they signed with the George H.W. Bush administration. It's not a breakthrough for them to agree to or to implement something they agreed to more than a quarter century ago. And the fact of the matter is, North Korea has been very aspirational. We've seen that their nuclear test site has collapsed. They may simply be wanting a pause, but I don't see any fundamental change in their ideology. And so I'd be very, very cautious, just as I was cautious when President Obama decided he wanted wanted to go all in for negotiations with Iran. At the very least, well before there's any trust, we've got to verify, and I haven't seen any indication the North Koreans are willing to do that.
Let me ask you a predicate question on this. As somebody who's obviously an expert in this space and has worked at the Pentagon, I mean, do foreign service officers and senior level personnel actually believe these sort of beauty pageant answers about world peace that you hear from politicians? Do they actually buy into it? Do they really forget who they're dealing with when you go from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, or you go from one Ayatollah to the other?
Well, we learn about multiculturalism in terms of appreciating each other's differences, essentially being able to walk into a sushi bar and order a mojito. Fundamentally, however, I don't think our diplomats fully understand the ideological basis of some of these differences, and that, fundamentally, they're only willing to see the good, not the bad. And at the same time, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a diplomat, all process seems good. And what they don't realize is for some of these countries, what we see as diplomacy, is negotiating how to get to yes, is actually an asymmetric warfare strategy to tie our hands while other advancements are made.
I guess New York Times celebrating Karl Marx's 200th birthday tells me everything I need to know. He is Michael Rubin, resident scholar for the American Enterprise Institute, author of a number of books, including Dancing with the Devil and Kurdistan Rising. Michael, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer.